Dave Tomek had shot this picture and posted it on Google+. I offered to edit it and share my workflow. Now, this image was provided to me as a JPEG, so I had to open it as a raw file in Photoshop. Not a simple open, but an open as. Now when you do this, the image will open up in Adobe Camera Raw. So I started going about my first set of adjustments, which was with the exposure levels, and I tinkered with them until I got a generally pleasing level. I then pulled back the highlights to recover as much detail as I could from the bright areas. Now this allowed me to go back and play with the exposure settings a little bit more to get a more well-balanced exposure of the image in general. It's a good start at this point. I then adjusted the clarity, vibrance and saturation, and I usually use default values of 50, 25 and 10 just out of experience, but in this case when I used those settings it overwhelmed the image, so I scaled them back a little bit and I used values of 35, 10 and 5 respectively. I then applied some lens correction and some chromatic aberration compensation. I also cranked up the sharpening of the image up to 75. At this stage I was ready to go ahead and open the image, and once it loaded into Photoshop, the first thing I noticed is that the horizon line in the foreground didn't quite work very well, so it was a matter of just using the transform tool and using the skew function over there to adjust the image to where there was a bit of balance with the horizon line and the rest of the composition. This sometimes happens just because of the angle from where you shoot from, and there's not much you can do about it except correct it in post. Now with this sorted, it was time to launch Nik Color Efex and begin processing the tones and colors. I started off by applying a gold reflector and just cranked down the intensity so that this didn't overwhelm the image entirely. Then I applied the sunlight filter and once again just scaled back the light intensity to not overwhelm the image altogether. Then a very standard graduated neutral density filter to make the upper parts of the sky darker than the lower parts. And then finally I used the Pro Contrast tool to enhance the dynamic range of the image. And this was tricky for this image because there's a fair bit of a dynamic range, a lot of the detail of which has been lost. And at this stage I hit OK and Nik Color Efex applies all its filters and creates another layer. Now the foreground element on this image is the tree, and its bark has a lot of detail which could be pretty interesting in an image like this. The challenge was to accentuate it without applying the same adjustments to the rest of the image and overwhelming it. Now to do this I had to use the quick select tool to create a mask, and got to go back and forth a couple of times with this because the quick select tool does tend to take up everything that falls over, so it was just a matter of going back and forth and refining that selection. And with all selected areas, it's very important to apply a little bit of contraction to the selected area and then a bit of feathering to the edges so you don't end up with a harsh line between the selected area and the background. Now after copying and pasting the selection into a new layer and then turning off the two background layers, I discovered that I'd selected some areas which I didn't want to. So once again, using the quick select tool, I just went ahead and selected them and then deleted them out of there. And naturally, once again, while applying selections, using the contracting and feathering of the selected areas. Now once I had the selection just right, I went ahead and launched Nik Viveza. And first things first, I went ahead and enhanced the structure, raised it up to 50% to bring out more detail in the bark, but I also applied a few adjustments to the brightness and the contrast to bring out the tree trunk a little bit more out of the shadows that it was currently in. And once I went ahead and applied those filters, it was fairly easy to see the difference that they made between the before and after. So at this stage I was more or less ready to finish the image. First order of business was to go ahead and crop the image. Once again, I crop my images based on the golden ratio, so essentially I take a dimension and I scale it by 1.618. Then I flattened all the visible layers of the image. The next step was just to apply a vignette. Now I do this in Nik Color Efex, and when I loaded Nik Color Efex up, I was tempted to play with the Pro Contrast tool to enhance the dynamic range a little bit more, but after trying it once or twice, I decided not to and just went ahead and applied a standard vignette. With the vignette applied on another layer, it's just a matter of flattening all visible layers. Finally, I saved the image as a full quality JPEG. Now there's a fair bit of noise that's been introduced into this image as a result of the sharpening, and I dealt with this in Noiseware. So I fired up Noiseware and I loaded the image that I just saved into the Noiseware interface. And for this particular image I just applied full suppression and let Noiseware do its magic. And once done, I just overwrote the processed JPEG and the image is ready. So there you have it from start to finish using Adobe Photoshop, Nik Color Efex, Nik Viveza, and Noiseware.